Every tree has roots, every life has branches, and every adoption has a story. Some stories begin with questions, some begin with loss. All of them are rooted in love and the search for connection. This is Janet Monroe, and this is Roots and Branches Adoption Stories, a podcast where real stories take root and grow. Because the more we share, the more we understand, and understanding helps us grow. Now, here's Janet Monroe.
Hello, and welcome to Roots and Branches Adoption Stories. My name is Janet, and I am your host. The roots represent the birth parents, the adoptee, and the adoptive parents, whereas the branches encompass the far-reaching effects of adoption. It's the siblings to the children and the great-grandchildren and friends, people that are all affected by adoption. Today's guest is a root, an adopted mother who chose an international adoption by bringing home 2 daughters from China. This is Kristen's journey into motherhood. So welcome, Kristen. I'm so happy that you're here with us today, and I'm really looking forward to the story that you have to tell. The floor is yours.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Janet. So again, my name is Kristen. I have 2 daughters that were adopted from China quite some time ago. So a little bit of this is probably how I remember it, and maybe not remembering all the things that went along the way. But I think today we're going to talk about my first daughter. Her name is Kylie. And I'll tell you how we got to the China point. We were suffering from some infertility problems. We had some friends who were doing IVF and other things, but I had a really busy career, and that really wasn't something I was interested in doing. So I went to visit my sister. She had just had her first baby, Lila, and I spent the week with her to help her out. And while I was there that week, the thought just came to my mind, like, why am I just not looking at adoption? So while I was visiting with her, taking care of her newborn, I did what I always do when I'm going to make a decision, which is I made a spreadsheet. Excuse me. Made a spreadsheet and started gathering information. At the time, adoption was very popular from China, Russia, and Guatemala. So I researched all 3 of those countries, and the U.S., obviously. And then I think I had Nepal and India in there as well, less popular. There weren't as many U.S. programs kind of facilitating that. So I compared a bunch of factors: the health of the baby, the time it takes, the cost, all of those things. We didn't really have any preference on race. They likely weren't going to look like us, so it didn't really matter anyway. So the big driver for me that sent me to China was they had the healthiest babies. And I thought, above all, what was most important to me was that I got a healthy baby. They also had a government-run program that was very structured, and had success in delivering what they had promised, and was actually on the rise of popularity at the time, which I did not know. So we selected China. Then we had to find an agency. So we moved forward researching in the U.S. Which agencies helped facilitate Chinese adoptions. We ended up with CCAI. I don't remember the exact reason we made the decision, but it definitely was the best decision. They were fantastic. Founded by 2 Chinese immigrants, Josh and Lily, and they were literally just wonderful, from setting expectations throughout the whole process, through the support in China. Their whole program was just fantastic. So we started the paperwork with them. We had to have a home study done. We had to have physicals, and we had to meet certain financial requirements to move forward. And then we had to get copies of a lot of official documents and compile them at different stages. The estimate of the timeline at the time was about 12 months from beginning to placement with your baby. Unfortunately, as I said, or fortunately, either way, depending which side you look at it from, China started becoming a very popular place to adopt from. Like I said, the structured program, delivered as promised. I think people were really liking the formality all around it and the governance. So we ended up waiting about 16 months until we finally got to Kylie. My husband and I and my parents all flew to China and stayed at the White Swan Hotel, which is very popular for Chinese adoptive families to stay at. They even give you a Chinese Barbie, which I should have brought. I'll do that next time. They give you a Barbie doll with a Chinese baby, a blonde Barbie doll with a Chinese baby in its arms. Maybe they don't do that anymore. I don't know if it's politically correct. But the whole thing was so exciting. And 16 months, as the wait grew long, you can imagine I became a little bit impatient. So the delay was a little bit of a challenge, which I filled mainly with buying more stuff for the child that I was bringing home, shopping around for all the things she probably didn't even use half of it. But either way, you know how it is with the first baby. Anyway, back to China. So we went to China. Kylie was actually from the province that we were staying in, Guangdong. And so we didn't have to travel anywhere else during our time there. The trip took about 2 weeks. We met her, I think, the second day we were there. There were 7 or 8 other families traveling with us, which was interesting. Some of them were kind of younger, as I was at the time. And then some were actually older, a little bit like later in life, adopting children. So something funny that happened was people kept asking my parents where their baby was because they thought my parents were also there adopting a baby. But really, it just took the 4 of us to wrangle that little 10-pound kid. So CCAI, again, I can't say how fantastic they were. They had someone stay at the hotel with us from beginning to end. They were there every day. They planned our excursions together with the babies. A lot of us did excursions together, so we became good friends with the other adoptive parents. Kylie actually was in an orphanage for the 10 months before she got to us. And one of her friends in the orphanage, Audrey, their parents were also on the trip with us, and we stayed friends with them. And for about the first, I guess, once the kids turned about 5, we started meeting in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to take them to Chinese Heritage Camp. And we did that for several years, and the girls became good friends. As a matter of fact, I think just recently I tried to make sure they were on each other's Instagram or something. So really great experience with the families there. Really great experience with our agency and our facilitator. Her name was Maggie. I still remember her. Every morning she would get us up. Every day we had a list of what we were supposed to do. And obviously we all had very tiny babies at the time, so we weren't talking as much to them. We were talking to each other since they didn't speak yet, and they definitely didn't speak English. One interesting thing that happened with Kylie, what I didn't know before I adopted, I kept thinking, well, I want a baby that's in the orphanage, because then when they come to me, I'll be the only parents they ever knew. And I realized later that that was a big mistake, because I just hadn't educated myself enough on attachment disorders and what happens in the first year of life and what a baby needs to endure in an environment where the orphanages are very understaffed and the nannies have to do certain things to keep those babies alive. They have to learn, even as infants, survival skills. And that's probably the most unexpected thing that I had with Kylie. She was very stubborn. She wouldn't let anyone see her cry. To this day, like, as a baby, we'd take her to get shots, get her ears pierced. She never cries. Like, she never lets people see her sweat. The other thing that we noticed about Kylie was she didn't make eye contact. She would avoid eye contact with you. And that actually went on until she got to high school. So we did realize later on that these were all just like symptoms of the attachment, or lack thereof attachment. And we've been able to get through all of them. So she's been fine. She really just had those 2 kind of minor things. But they were very prevalent, even well into, her first few years, which is, we try to tell her, oh, look at me, Kylie. Oh, here, look. And she just kind of had this avoidant way about her. But otherwise, she was a perfectly healthy kid, still is a perfectly healthy kid. She just turned 20. And that was one thing that I really didn't realize at the time. The other thing, the story that I was getting to related to that is the babies in China, before you leave, it takes about 2 weeks to get their passports and all their paperwork in order. And they have to have a physical before they leave because they've promised you a healthy baby, and the laws in China require that if you promise a healthy baby, you have to deliver a healthy baby. When Kylie went for her physical, just to show how stubborn she was, we took her down to the medical office, and they do some very basic things. They lay them on the table, they check a few things, the doctor listens to their heart, and then they do a hearing test, which involves shaking a rattle behind their ear and seeing if they turn their head. Something about that primitive. Well, they tried it on Kylie several times, and she wouldn't budge when they shook the rattle. So they decided that they thought she may be deaf. So they came to us with Maggie, our facilitator, and the doctors, and Maggie said, well, the doctors think that she might not be able to hear. And by this time, I've already had her for a few days, all of us. So my parents are there, my husband's there. They come to us and say, we think she might be deaf. Do you want us to find you another baby? Well, we're already in love at this point. And my mom's like, I know sign language, we can figure this out. So we told them, no, we don't want you to call in, go get another baby for us. We're going to take her whether she's deaf or not. And then we spent the next week and a half of our trip to China walking up behind her, trying to scare her to see if she could hear the noises. But we really felt strongly that she wasn't deaf. She was just really stubborn. But that just goes to show you, the survival skill that she learned. At that point, she was 10 months old, and she had already learned just strict obedience. Do not, don't let them see you sweat. And that's what got her through the 10 months, surviving in the orphanage. So that was really interesting. We also got to see many great cultural aspects of China while we were there. I really fell in love with it. And we felt it was really important to keep that in Kylie's life. So we managed to buy a bunch of things. And I remember I planned it out that I bought something to give her on her birthday every year up to her 21st birthday, which was going to be a set of pearls that I bought in China. She's only 20, so she doesn't have them yet, but I might just save them for her wedding. Anyway, so we got home from China, so we made the flight home. Luckily, my mother took care of her for most of the flight because she was very fidgety, and it was a long flight all the way back to Newark, I think about 12, 13 hours. And then we got home and just kind of started trying to let her adjust to our life. She was... at first, she was pretty compliant. Then I think once she found out that she could get away with a little more in this environment, she started doing some sneaky little things like throwing herself over the crib after we put her to bed, sitting on the floor of her room and playing. Sneaking around the house in the middle of the night as she got a little older. She kind of became a little bit of a rebel in her youth, which is just a further extension of that stubbornness, I suppose. But all in all, she really, we didn't know if learning the language would be a problem because she was, just starting to learn English. She hadn't heard for the first year of her life. She hadn't heard English. We didn't know she was going to be behind on reading and learning. We had a couple tests done by the schools, and we didn't really find any problem. She definitely would let you know if she preferred one daycare over another, which she did in one case. Luckily, it was the cheaper one she liked better, so that worked out well. And then she had a late June birthday, assigned birthday. So she was a young one in her grade. We thought about maybe holding her back a year, letting her start kindergarten after she turned 6, and she had just turned 5. But we stuck her in there. She seemed ready from preschool, and she went in, kindergarten at first and sailed right through. Her grades, interestingly, got better the higher she got in school. She kind of went from an ABC elementary student to a AB middle school student, to an A student in high school, and now she's at the University of Texas at Austin, which is definitely not an easy school to get into. What are some other topics, Janet, that I didn't really touch on? I kind of went through the process. I will say we were very lucky. We had pretty seamless transition into our family. We had great support. As I said, my parents went with us. All of my college friends, girlfriends, threw me a fantastic baby shower before we got her, all China themed. They did some really great um, China events at the baby shower. That was really great. The first, I would say, one thing that I didn't really anticipate was probably about the first 10 years, we got a lot of weird questions, like at the grocery store, like, oh, is her dad Chinese? Or like, um, where is she from? And then once we got Allie, it was like, oh, are they biologically related? No, I mean, that would be strange odds, 5 years apart. But I never really minded the questions. People were just curious and sometimes didn't have the right words. So I would say all in all, we're a pretty uneventful, adoptive family. Um, and our friends were really supportive. Our family were really supported. The girls are spoiled rotten by my parents these days. They take them all around the world, on vacation in the summer. And at first, I would say I tried to really keep, like, Chinese New Year. I tried to take them to events, take them to Chinese events in the area. Um, Kylie kind of is a thrill seeker, so she kind of got a kick out of anything. She always liked being out, trying different stuff. And we'd always take her to the New Year's events. But then and it was cute when they were little, I'd take them to the Chinese museum and stuff. But then as Kylie started to get older, like, I think she was just like, I don't really care, Mom. I'm American. I did ask her when she was older, I was like, would you be interested in going back to China? She's like, yeah, maybe someday. But I'm like, they have these tours we can go on. Do you want to go back and see where you were born? Like, kind of uninterested in that too. More interested in Snapchat and the University of Texas Longhorns.
So what's she studying in Texas?
So she's studying public relations and marketing.
Okay. When you first decided, did you choose a girl, or is that what they chose for you?
So at that time, that's all that was available. We said that we would take a boy, girl, or twins. But really, the boys were so few and far between. You really had to go on like a special needs list, and a lot of them were older. It was just an abundance of girls at the time. So this would have been 2005, 2006. They had tons of girls available, but they had rising demand available as well, from Europe and the U.S. So they were, fleets of families were coming in weekly, and they were bringing those babies from all over China. They really had an abundance of girls because of the one-child policy. Now that has since dried up, but I'll tell you that one fun fact, they do, when you're traveling by your login date. When China logs you in, that's your date that measures you in the system of when your number's coming up, basically. So everybody who has the same login date, which is the date your application is formally filed with the Chinese government, once you have your login date, like you're traveling with those people at your agency. We all have this login date. We're with this agency. And you can kind of estimate by the progress they're making when you're going to travel. So you keep track of which login date they're at. We could find that was public record. And then you could kind of estimate when you'd be making the trip. Well, when we started with Kylie, I believe we were supposed to travel. We thought it was going to be either December or January was our original time frame that we thought. And as we got to about November of that year, we noticed that they weren't making it through as many login dates as they were each week. It started moving slower and slower. So we actually were delayed. Like I said, it ended up being about 4 months later than we had originally anticipated that we'd be traveling. However, if I thought that was bad at the time, or any of my travel mates thought that was bad at the time, I'll tell you this. We knew we wanted another baby from China. So you have to wait a year from your original login date to get another login date. So I already had everything as ready to go by the time we traveled to get Kylie. So I actually got logged in a little bit earlier than the 12 months. But the demand got so crazy during that period that after we got Kylie, even though I filed again in a year, that next login date, I think at the time we decided to stop watching it, which would have been like 5 years later when we decided to go get Allie. By the time we watched it, that login date was projected to be 13 years in the future. So that just goes to show you it went from a 1 year wait to a 13-year wait for a healthy baby from China, just in the span of about a year and a half. Which is why there aren't a lot of babies available. I think it's just kind of dried up. Like, things have changed in China.
Was
and
that
there's just a
because
different
that one
dynamic.
baby policy
But
was
I don't.
canceled?
Yeah, I think there were changes to the one child policy, and additionally, I think economically they're just doing better, so they can afford to pay penalties if they have more babies than they're supposed to have. Plus, I think there are some other dynamics, and Janet, you'll have to forgive me, I haven't researched it in a while, but I think some of the other dynamics going on were that they were running out of girls for their sons to marry.
Okay.
Like, there was such a disproportionate number of boys to girls, and it was messing up the natural, societal, ratios that they had there. So I think they let up on some of that a little bit, which changed the dynamic. Some other things that I think might have contributed to that rush on the Chinese adoptions in the late 2000s were that new Hague rules had come out, and not all countries were meeting their criteria for the Hague adoption rules. I think Guatemala was one of the really big ones, but I think they didn't get Hague approved, so that shut down. I believe at the time there were about 25,000 adoptions happening from Guatemala a year at the time, similar to China, and I think Guatemala totally fell off the map. So all of a sudden you had potentially 25,000 people, hoping for a baby from Guatemala that now have to jump into another bucket. I don't know what all the dynamics were, but it was a crazy ride. So I'm glad that we got her when we did. At the time, those last 4 months were stressful, but if I had waited at all beyond the moment that I had my adoption epiphany, we certainly would have been in a much different situation and wouldn't have gotten her so
my
quickly.
question to you is, why did you choose an international adoption over adopting in America?
That's a good question. It may not be wildly popular. My answer
right.
may not be, but when I did research adopting domestically, and it seemed like it wasn't very easy. You could adopt through foster, which was a possibility. The other big option that I found was they were all very religious based. And I like to say I'm spiritual, but not religious. I kind of have a coexist mentality. And they had some very specific requirements on how you were to raise the children. And I didn't like that. And I wasn't going to lie and put a profile out there saying that I promised to raise this child in the Catholic Church, faithfully going every week and all this stuff, or Christian church. We've always exposed the children to various religions, but I kind of feel like that's a decision they can make for themselves when they're adults. So that was one thing that just kind of turned me off, and it was profile after profile, and I was like, these people sound like wonderful humans, but like, I don't know that I fit in on this website. And then the foster situation, also again, the health of the baby comes into consideration. Obviously in America, although I've heard some interesting stories about adoption, I think it's just more helpful if you're in a network. A lot of people through their church or through someone, they were able to find someone to adopt their baby. I think I just didn't know how to pursue it. Those are the things I found. And I was like, it just did it in my gut. I was like, I don't know, this doesn't seem right. And then I was like, well, we haven't been out of the United States. This would be a good chance to check out China or somewhere else. So I don't know. I think that's what I remember from the time. I had a feeling you might ask that question though, because why would you choose to spend all that money to go so far away? But that was what I recall at the time. Just as I had done the research, something felt like it just wasn't a fit.
So now that you brought Kylie home and you've got her in school, was there any prejudices to her being Chinese and with a white mother and father?
Okay, interesting question. One that I did not even know the answer to until more recently. Um, when my younger daughter brought something up, Kylie said she needed thicker skin. She goes, "They used to call me Ching Chang in middle school." She never told me that, but people used to call her Ching Chang. Um, and other than that, but I don't, it must not have bothered her too much. Like I said, she's got pretty thick skin. So my little one, I think, would have been much more fazed by that. They did get a little bit, when COVID first hit, there was a little bit of, I think they had got a couple rumblings about China and being Chinese. But uh, listen, neither of them ever came home crying saying somebody called them, some derogatory name. So they've had events, but like I don't think it really phases them. And I think they've been very few and far between. They aren't the school that they go to. Kylie actually had a fellow Chinese adoptee in her grade, and I don't think Allie has any in her school, but they have an Asian club over there at the high school, and Kylie says it's the best club out there because they have the best food and they feed them every month at their meetings. so, so she did have a bunch of Asian friends in high school towards the end, just because she gravitated towards that club. But her friends have always been diverse, and the same with Allie. As a matter of fact, Allie has a very diverse friend group. So I don't think they've had a lot of, I don't know. These days, you never know. You don't know how the generations change, but I don't think they've had anything really negative happen to them where race was ever a problem. And as far as the parents, we've all gotten questions of confusion. like Kylie's had a friend over, and they walked in, and the girl said, "Oh my gosh, I just assumed your dad was Asian." Like they just didn't consider that she was adopted.
So how do you feel about having adopted two children, two girls?
Oh, I would have done it much earlier if I knew what I know now. Like, I would definitely do it again. I wouldn't have wasted any time going to the fertility doctors. And it wasn't paid at the time by insurance. Now they pay for all that, but at the time they didn't. I feel like insurance kicks in on all the things right after I get them, like LASIK, fertility, like whatever it is. As soon as I do it, then now insurance covers it. So I would do it again 100 times over. They've just been great. I mean, they're just good girls. Like, even from the beginning, when Kylie was a baby, we would take her to restaurants, plop her in the seat, we make them try whatever, of course, when she was really little, we'd get her the kids menu or whatever. But if they wanted to try adult food, we were letting them try adult food. I remember right after we moved to Texas, we had season tickets to this children's theater in Fort Worth, and they had something like once every 6 weeks or something, probably 6 shows a year, and we'd take Kylie over there. She was only 4 years old, but it was kind of we've just moved to Texas, what's something fun we could do with Kylie, she's not in school yet. We got tickets to this theater. So one day on the way home, we noticed there was like an oyster place, maybe a Cajun seafood place or something. So we're like, oh, let's stop there for dinner. So we go in and we're like, oh, they have raw oysters. And my husband and I both really liked raw oysters. So we order a dozen, as people typically do when you get them. And Kylie's sitting there. She's like, oh, I want to try one. We're like, okay, there's no way she's going to like this raw oyster. The next thing I know, the kid has literally rounded the plate of ice and eaten the entire dozen oysters. So we had to order a whole nother plate. So Kylie will try anything. Like, she's always open to try food. I remember one time we were on a trip to Cancun, like an all-inclusive, and we went, you rotate through the restaurants, and we went to this one restaurant, and they had this grilled octopus that was kind of, just one tentacle of the octopus. And it was fantastic, I have to say. But of all the food we ate there, and I think Kylie had a steak and whatever, and of all the food we ate there, I remember the next morning, Kylie's like, can we go back to that place and eat that octopus? So she just has a great palate. Like, she'll try all different stuff. But we took her to restaurants since she was a baby, and because we had bought all that stuff for taking your kids out to shop, and the shopping cover and the seat cover and all those things, we had to use them. So, but we would take her to, just to Applebee's or whatever. She never threw a fit. She always was good. You know, I think we just got them exposed right out of the gate, and she had that nice stubbornness. So she never threw a fit. She would always eat her food. She, of course, she was very interested in food when we first brought her home. I should mention that. I think it had been a little bit scarce, you know, with her formula. So she was very food curious from the beginning, and still is. And she still eats a lot more than the 100 pounds she weighs. But anyway, just well behaved. We were just really lucky. Like, she was just a good baby, you know, with the exception of a little mischief at home. Like I said, we'd watch her on the crib cam, jumping over the edge of the crib and then hoisting herself
So
back
did she
up.
have any attachment problems with regards to attachment to you?
I think other than those two traits that I mentioned, I don't think she really had any trouble eventually attaching to us. The hard part was changing the behaviors she had learned to survive. I think she felt comfortable with us. Obviously, she was spoiled with more attention in the first 2 weeks that she was with us than she had probably had in the last 10 months. So I think she was aware that she was coming into a new environment and it was obviously very different. So I think she knew something was different and that it was better. One thing that took a little longer was I think she was very skeptical of strangers. Like, I think she did okay kind of bonding to us in the beginning. We spent a lot of time with her. After we brought her home, I had 3 months of maternity leave. I think it was 3 months. Anyway, maybe it was 6 weeks. Anyway, now it's like 4 months. We took her on like a 16-state road trip to meet all the relatives and friends. So the first, month and a half, we were really together all day, all the time. And she was a little road warrior too with us, so I think she did fine kind of attaching to us. I do think it took her some time, and even like with doctors and stuff when she was little, I think she was very like skeptical. And one thing I should have put in this story is when she wanted a little sister, when we took her to China, when we went to get Allie, for some reason, I just told you how good she was. She kind of behaved in public. I never had to like take him out of the place and spank him or anything like that, like our parents had to do with us. They were just very well behaved. But when we went back to get Allie, Kylie was 4 at the time, about 4.5, I guess. Yeah, maybe she was 5. Anyway, we went back to China, and I remember we were about halfway through the trip, and we were staying just outside of Beijing. And we went to this little restaurant, just a simple little restaurant to get something to eat. And we were walking back to the hotel, and Kylie threw this fit in the restaurant like I had never seen. And like I said, we're about halfway through the trip. Like, we've had Allie for a few days. And so she threw this fit, so much so that I was like, we've got to go. We're going back to the hotel. She was like throwing food. We went back in the parking lot. We started walking in the parking lot back to the hotel. And she's just being, I can't remember exactly what happened, but at one point I was like, Kylie, why are you behaving like this? And she did start to cry, and she said, don't leave me here in China now that you have a new baby. So she did misunderstand that situation a little bit. But after all these months of talking about going and getting her sister and all this stuff, like, even though she didn't show any emotion at the time and acted like this is the greatest idea, I will tell you, for a little bit after that, I might have heard the comment around the house a couple times, like, why don't you just take her back to China, about the new baby. So I think, some of that attachment insecurity carried on, much later in her life, beyond her feeling comfortable with us. It took her probably a little bit more time. I mean, Allie trusted us the day we got her. Kylie definitely took more time than that. But I think that some of those symptoms did kind of carry through, much later in her life.
So what would you recommend to someone who's contemplating an international adoption? What advice would you give them?
I would say, 1, find a great agency. CCAI only did China when I used them, but now they operate in 6 different states, I think, and they do 7 different countries. They are excellent, and they've been doing this for 30 years. So and they also do domestic adoptions now as well. Secondly, I would say if you can if you're looking for a baby and they've been fostered, that is better than them being in an institution. Because what I didn't know when I got Kylie is once a baby attaches during that first year, they can reattach to anyone else. But if they don't attach, that's when you start to have your attachment disorders.
Okay.
And then I think that's about it. And just try to find a program that is legit, not like corrupt, because many of them are corrupt, or they were when I did it. So make sure that's not the case.
Okay. So we also have your story with Allie that we will do in the coming weeks so that you can talk about adoption number 2, because Allie was a special needs child and had certain circumstances that had to be taken care of and that you look forward to adopting. I want to thank you for being on. Love your story. I love your energy. I love your passion. And your
thanks,
love
Janet.
for your children comes right through.
I love your story and your passion
your love
too.
for your children comes straight
Great.
through with everything.
Thank you for tuning in to Roots and Branches Adoption Stories, where every tree has roots, every life has branches, and every adoption has a story. Got an adoption story you want to tell? Want to learn more about adoption stories? Then visit rootsandbranchesadoptionstories.com.